Hi, everybody. Dennis Prager here. And as always, thank you for being with me. A very, very bright man whom I read regularly is John Zmirak, Z-M-I-R-A-K, senior editor of TheStream.com, author of, among other books, I might add, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Catholicism. Obviously, a practicing Catholic himself and a serious thinker. He has a great book on immigration, which is the last time I had him on. So, John, welcome back to the Dennis Prager Show.
Thank you, Dennis. If I could just correct something, it's stream.org. Stream.org is where I write. Thank you.
Okay. I got the wrong info here.
That's okay.
I hate when that happens, but it's inevitable. All right, stream.org. Okay, good. I'm glad you corrected it. I want people to go to your website.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. So let's talk about Pope Francis, and I have not talked about this much. It's a huge item, and one reason is this is such a sensitive issue. I have criticized this Pope a lot. I just want you to have a little background here. My thesis is that mainstream Protestantism, non-Orthodox Judaism, and much of the Catholic Church has, including the Pope, is essentially its values are leftist more than any other thing, including Christian, Catholic, Protestant Catholic, or Jewish. So this is a terrible crisis for these three branches of biblical religion, I guess a good way to put it. And so I have spoken about the Pope, but on this particular issue with regard to the charges against him made by Archbishop Carlo Vigano, who was the former papal nuncio, which means papal ambassador to the United States. He's a very high-ranking Catholic. About the Pope and covering up for abuse of children that he actually knew took place and undid some of the punishments meted out by Pope Benedict. I wanted to speak to a Catholic, and so I'm speaking to you. So before you offer your ideas, give my audience a brief factual synopsis of where we're at.
Sure. A very high-ranking archbishop, the former Vatican ambassador to the U.S., has made a very specific and detailed list of charges about which bishops and which popes knew about sex abuse and cover-up. And he has said that the documents exist in the Vatican embassy in Washington, D.C. The U.S. could actually subpoena them, except they're protected by diplomatic immunity. And we've got a piece at stream.org where we call on President Trump to have the Justice Department subpoena those records and demand that the Vatican waive its diplomatic immunity, or with the U.S. should cut off diplomatic relations with the Vatican and send their ambassador home and pull our ambassador back. Because no more than, sometimes like you'll see Saudi UN representatives will be like using slaves in their Upper East Side apartments, and the U.S. will have to kick them out of the country because of what they're doing. Well, right now, it seems, if Vigano is telling the truth, there was a criminal conspiracy to cover up the sexual abuse of American citizens, some of them children, some of them like 18-year-old seminarians being harassed by the bishop who ran the seminary where they were, demanding that they get in bed with him. I mean, this is Harvey Weinstein stuff. Okay, imagine if Harvey Weinstein had been the Archbishop of Washington, D.C., and people were covering up the documents that said who knew when he was sexually abusing people and when. Cardinal McCarrick actually molested a child he had baptized as a baby. Think about that one.
How old was the child when he did this?
15. He stayed in touch with the family, stayed a family friend, and when he was 15, he started a sexual predatory relationship with someone he had held as a baby and baptized. That is one of the most staggeringly evil things I've ever heard. The current Archbishop of Washington, D.C., Donald Wuerl, is denying that he had any knowledge of this. Well, it's all there in the documents, and Pope Francis won't turn them over. Cardinal Wuerl won't turn them over. What they're doing is circling the wagons and attacking all the people asking questions, claiming that they're homophobes. The Cardinal Archbishop of Chicago, Blaise Cupich, is also named in this accusation as being part of this. Again, you could only call it a conspiracy that, like, the pedophile faction of the church apparently not only exists, but they were the ones who put Pope Francis on the throne. It was their votes in the conclave. It was their leadership. And after the conclave, he went and he lifted all the sanctions against clerics who'd been engaged in covering up for pedophiles. It's not just McCarrick. It's Cardinal Daniels of Belgium. Cardinal Wuerl was rewarded. All these, and left-right is not really important, but all these cardinals that Pope Francis had been appointing in the United States apparently are implicated in this ring of silence, of covering up for sex abuse. Maybe it's not true. There's one way to prove it. The documents are sitting there in Washington, D.C. The church is sitting on them. As a Catholic, I have very little hope that the church will release them without public pressure. So I would like to see President Trump make the U.S. diplomatic relations with the Vatican conditional on the Vatican turning over these files to investigators from the Justice Department. I've heard that Attorney General Sessions is considering a RICO investigation of the U.S. Catholic bishops because they were shuffling these pedophile priests between different states.
Okay, I'm somewhat out of breath here. Let me ask you this. What is new in Archbishop Vigano's indictment?
Okay.
Vigano, I'm sorry. Vigano.
What's new is he asserts that he has personal knowledge that Pope Benedict tried to impose penalties on Archbishop Cardinal McCarrick. They weren't sufficient, but they were something. And that Pope Francis knew about it, and after accepting McCarrick's support to be elected Pope, reversed those sanctions and let McCarrick run around the world as a goodwill ambassador, go visit Africa, live in a seminary with young men, live near boys' schools, and basically let this predator run around as a goodwill ambassador for the church. He says Pope Francis knew it. He names other cardinals who knew it. He says there's documentary evidence. He's a whistleblower. People are trying to present him as some disgruntled, vicious man with an axe to grind. He's a whistleblower. And when people demonize the whistleblower, you have to wonder why. I really think this is like Watergate. And Pope Francis is right now, Richard Nixon, sitting in the White House trying to figure out who he can throw under the bus to save his own skin.
Saving his own skin means remaining Pope. Ross Douthat, writing, I believe Douthat is Catholic, writing in the New York Times, is as angry as you, but says 2 resignations by popes in one millennium is too many.
Yeah, I think that's a mistake. I think it was a mistake for Benedict to resign.
Please. Listen. I just want to tell you.
You know why he resigned? We're finding out why he resigned. He resigned a few days after receiving a 300-page dossier on how a network of sexual predators, mostly gay, had virtual control of the Vatican bureaucracy, that they were having cocaine-fueled orgies with underage male prostitutes in the Vatican palaces. Pope Benedict read that report, and it broke him. And he thought maybe a younger man could come and sweep it all out. What he didn't know was that the pedophile faction had already counted up their votes and were already ready to seize control of the papacy, and they still have it now. So, no, I think he needs to resign. Don't worry, George Soros will give him a very nice house to retire in somewhere in the south of France, probably.
I just want to say to my listeners, and you might find this of interest, I was very annoyed at Benedict for resigning. I thought he was a light in a dark age in Europe. He understood the battles that needed to be fought against the radical secularization of Europe, against radical Islam, and I did not understand at all why he retired. Even your explanation means that he was just naive on this matter. I will resign and therefore my successor will do more cleaning up than I can. I don't. It doesn't fully.
He was naive. Pope Benedict was naive. He was old. he'd been beaten down. Remember that when he was Pope, he was under incessant attack. He tried to, as best he could, to clean up this sex scandal, and he was attacked for it.
All right, hold on there. John Zmirak of Stream.org and The Politically Incorrect Guide to Catholicism, a great book. All right, everybody, Dennis Prager here with John Zmirak, very thoughtful writer. I had him on for his Politically Incorrect Guide to Immigration, and he's also written the Politically Incorrect Guide to Catholicism. By the way, I'd like to just add that those politically incorrect guides are superb. I have read a number of them. The Vietnam one was extraordinary, just extraordinary. And I salute Regnery. And for full disclosure, they have published my book, The Rational Bible. So, but most of my books have been published by HarperCollins, so it has nothing to do with the fact that Regnery's published my latest book. They're just terrific. Question for you. How do you know that is why that this horrible description that you just described in the highest echelons of the Catholic Church with pedophile parties and the like, how do you know that that's why Benedict resigned?
I don't know for sure, but that's what Archbishop Vigano suggested, and I think he's a pretty good inside source.
Okay, I didn't realize that he had made that suggestion.
Yeah, he basically said that Pope Benedict despaired when he saw the extent of the libertine, sexually active, predatory gay mafia inside the Vatican itself. It was shortly after his personal butler had leaked a bunch of his own of private documents to the media. Pope Benedict felt surrounded and betrayed. He was constantly attacked in the media, whatever he did. Just the way Pope Francis is fawned over whatever he does. And in Vigano's letter and in other news reports by people like George Neumeier and Michael Brendan Doherty, you can see that Pope Francis has a track record of covering up for sex abuse, reappointing people who've been credibly accused of sex abuse in Chile, in Argentina.
What animates him? What animates him in this regard, in your opinion?
What animated Cardinal Law? They think the institution of the church is more important than the innocence of children.
All right. So you think that's it, rather than a particular affinity for the pedophile gay priests?
Yeah, no, I think Pope Francis is using the gay lobby and using these people who are morally compromised because he has dirt on them. He can control them. They will follow his will. And I think his real agenda is sort of George Soros globalism with global institutions controlling the world economy, open borders, destroying capitalism. I think sexual morality, one way or the other, is of secondary interest to this Pope. Let me point out this. If Vigano is telling the truth, and the documents will tell the tale, at the same time Pope Francis was lifting any restrictions on Cardinal McCarrick, who molested the boy he had baptized. At the same moment he was lifting those restrictions, he was writing a document that condemned air conditioning as sinful at the same time. So that tells you about his moral priorities.
Well, I just read, tell me if it's accurate, because I'm very careful here, because there's so much on the internet that I always have to verify. What is the man's name? Kupich, and is he a cardinal?
He was made a cardinal. He was plucked from obscurity in state of Washington. He was a bishop where he was not letting priests do pro-life activities. He was not letting them do the Latin Mass. He was supporting pro-gay priests. They found him. People like McCarrick found him, and Wuerl found him, and gave his name to Pope Francis, who made him Archbishop of Chicago, one of the 2 or 3 most important jobs in America. Yeah, so Blaise Kupich.
Okay,
not very bright.
All right, well, okay. I don't know him from Adam, but I saw, tell me if you are familiar at all, that he said this is all I'm paraphrasing. This is all nonsense. What really matters is global warming.
Yeah, he said that, and he said that Pope Francis's critics hate him because he's a Latino, and he described all this interest in, who was involved in covering up the rape of children. He said, well, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. And that just strikes me as an amazingly insensitive thing to say when we're talking about the rape of children. It's just disgusting.
This is a taboo question, and everybody knows, or anyone who listens knows. I mean, I have gay presenters at Prager University. I am the godfather to two children of a gay couple. So I have a pretty good, it's pretty clear where my heart is, and it is with everybody's created in God's image. So I'm not asking this as a hostile question, but
Sure.
But I think it's important. Do you have any idea what percentage of priestly child abuse was same sex?
80%. And most of it was teenage boys. So we're not talking about clinical pedophilia. We're talking about, there's some segments of the gay community that think that cruising teenagers is okay, and apparently a lot of them became Catholic priests and bishops and cardinals.
Why did they? I mean, obviously this is conjecture.
Sure.
Did they do it because being a priest gave them good cover?
I think, and I'm rather cynical, I think the talented ones went to work on Broadway or for the Democratic Party, and the less talented members of the gay community found a very comfortable lifestyle in palatial homes with guaranteed incomes and very light workloads, and the opportunity to rise to the top in an
all right. We'll continue. John Zmirak, politically incorrect guide to Catholicism. Hi, everybody. Dennis Prager and John Zmirak, Z-M-I-R-A-K, who happens to be, he's not on because of the book, but I won't recommend the book anyway. Politically Incorrect Guide to Catholicism. He's obviously a committed Catholic, and he's a very powerful intellectual voice in a number of arenas. And again, your website is called stream.org?
That's right. We've got some good pieces covering the papal scandal right now. I've got a piece up there where I call for the government of Italy to demand the files on every cardinal so that they can keep cardinals who were involved in predatory behavior out of the nation of Italy. I think that would be very important. It could make sure that the next papal election, if Francis resigns or is somehow called home,
right, I want to talk to you about that.
The next papal election will not be dominated by the pedophile faction. I mean, I think the government
By the way,
has the right to know.
I think that we shouldn't use the word pedophile if overwhelmingly it was teenagers. It's terrible and evil.
I'm talking about people who covered up the sexual abuse of underage people. And I'm using. Look, it just has a nice sound to it. The correct term is ephebophilia. Do you really want me to use that?
No, but I think only because you may not agree with me. I believe there are levels of sin, and somehow between a 17 or a 15-year-old, it's awful in this regard. It's just evil. But a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old is double evil. That's all. So I want to be very careful. But anyway, and also people should know what happened is mostly teenage boys. That's
teenage boys and 20-year-old seminarians who were financially dependent on. They were living at the bishop's mercy. So it's a blend between. It's sort of in between Roman Polanski and Harvey Weinstein.
Do you think the Pope will resign?
No.
I don't think so either.
I think the only way would be if everywhere he goes, he is greeted by crowds that mock him and throw tomatoes at him, because he is a very, very proud, arrogant man. There's a great book, also from Regnery, called The Dictator Pope, and it chronicles his whole rise to power. It was very carefully calculated and cynically executed, and just how many people he ruined and how many people he manipulated in Argentina. This man is a
who wrote that book?
Juan Perón.
Who wrote the book?
Henry Sire. It's under a pseudonym, Marc Antonio Colonna. But just Dictator Pope, look it up, and it goes back all the way to when he was first a priest, and it shows where all the bodies are buried, figuratively, and how he rose to power in quite a cynical and calculated way. And I think it's quite cynical right now that the Pope is about to issue another document on the environment and on clean water.
Yeah, that's why they love him.
That is his response, and he's refusing to do the simple
Yeah.
thing. These documents exist in Washington, D.C. and the Vatican.
By the way, his answer
innocent,
on the papal airplane or his Aer Lingus was amazing. I mean, it's there. Read it. Okay, let me quickly take a call. Columbus, Ohio. Sherry, hi.
Hi, Dennis. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you.
So I am a graduate in 1988 from a Catholic high school in the Pittsburgh Diocese that was greatly impacted by the headmaster, who was definitely, and I will say, a pedophile. And the reason that I say that word can definitely be used is because as children in the Catholic religion, we were all groomed by our parents, by our priests, by our leaders in the trust, and this is where we learned to trust the priests, and we learned to trust our leaders. So, and I do believe that even as a teenager, when a grown man uses that trust and grooms and violates, that is still pedophilia. This has been such a hard thing for all of us. I was chatting with about 47 of the alumni from the high school last week, 2 of which remain Catholic at this time, and this is such an overwhelming sadness and angering event. It feels like a spiritual rape, even to those of us that were not directly molested by these men.
Well, I have a question, one final one, based on that, and I totally hear you. It has to be unbelievably painful for a faithful Catholic. But I do want to ask John, and I got to take a break, so you'll answer after the break if you would. The argument made by many, Catholic and non-Catholic, that this is a small percentage of Catholic priests. So I'd like you to address that. We will be back in a moment. I'm looking at the calls, and it's painful. I want you to know, if you're a faithful Catholic, my heart goes out to you. As much as any of us have any issues with clergy in our own faith, and we all do, I mean, they're human beings. To have the highest echelons of your faith act in such a way, or some of them, it's very, especially the Pope, it's a very distressing thing. I will deal next week with the issue of people leaving religion because of the actions of religious leaders. I want to defend staying in your faith. And I'll do that next week. John Zmirak, I asked you this question. How do you answer, and you're a faithful Catholic, how do you answer, well, this is all horrible, but let's keep perspective, it's a very small percentage of priests. Is John there?
Yes.
Okay, I'm
Hello?
sorry. It was our fault here. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, yes, it is a very small percentage of priests, and the incidence of child sex abuse among priests has plummeted since 2002. That's all true. This is not a scandal about your ordinary Catholic priest. There's no reason to be distrustful or hostile towards these priests. Most of them are wonderful, and the percentage of priests who offend against children is smaller than that of school teachers. That's not what this scandal is about. This is a bishop's scandal. There is a very high percentage of bishops who covered up for sex abuse. That's what this is about. In 2002, when the bishops convened to deal with sex abuse, 2/3 of them were implicated in covering up. 2/3. Not one of them resigned. And in fact, when they wrote the document to deal with sex abuse, they specifically exempted bishops from any penalties. And do you know who made that change in the document? Cardinal McCarrick. That's what we're talking about. This is about bishops covering up sex abuse cases in order to protect the church's finances and their reputations. It's not about these ordinary priests doing hard work in dangerous parishes, often a very lonely job. I love the priests of the Catholic Church. Some of the best people, best men I've known in my life have been priests. This is not about priests being perverts. This is about bishops being criminals.
Okay, that's an important answer. So I just want to talk to you now about being a Catholic. Give an under 1 minute response to the Catholic who is now very troubled by his faith and might even consider leaving the church.
Yeah, I would say, I've struggled with that too, thanks to Pope Francis. I would say the devil attacks the things that are most important. He attacks motherhood in the form of abortion. He attacks marriage in the form of dismantling the institution legally. He's attacking Catholicism because it's the oldest, largest apostolic church going back to AD 33. And the devil's attack on it should be no surprise. And he's attacked it before, sometimes with great success. I would suggest sticking with it, and I think it's extremely hopeful that Archbishop Vigano came out and told us where all the bodies are buried and where the sticky fingerprints of corruption are. And I think you need to stay and bring these perverts down.
All right. I'm very glad I called on you, and I hope Tara in Minneapolis. I'm Catholic. We look at the Pope as infallible in his teaching, faith, and morals. I'm very upset. Actually, they're only infallible, Tara. I mean, this I know, on very, very, very few matters, and they are all doctrinal. And
Right.
If I'm not mistaken, it's only been invoked twice in Catholic history?
That's right. I mean, the best example is when Antonin Scalia wrote for the court majority, he was representing the authoritative interpretation of the U.S. Constitution. The rest of the time, when he talked on the golf course or gave a talk at a college, he did not have any of the authority of the Supreme Court. In the same way, the only times the popes have that negative protection is when they invoke it, and it's only happened for certain twice. It hasn't happened since 1950. On everything else, Pope Francis is no more beyond criticism than Harvey Weinstein or Paul Manafort. No disrespect intended to Mr. Weinstein or Mr. Manafort.
All right, John Zmirak. Good luck to you and his.
Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you. He has, and I hope he continues. And same to you. Stream.org is his website. Author of The Politically Incorrect Guide to Catholicism. I will deal. I need to deal with this next week. I will. Tomorrow's Friday. We don't have a lot of time because we have the happiness hour and open hour. But on people who are disappointed in their faith, what to do about it, I think I might be able to give you some intellectual responses.